For me, these environment diagram questions are a lot like the what would Python display questions. The key to these problems is keeping your attention wherever the code needs it and not getting distracted by the surrounding code. This applies even more so here than in the previous questions. Python has very strict rules with environment diagrams, and as long as you follow them exactly as Python tutor would, you'll get full points. And if you mess up in the middle so that nothing makes sense, don't be afraid to scrap everything and start over. Alright, on to the questions itself. For these kind of problems, here's some advice. Ignore everything indented until you're required to execute it. It'll keep you focused. Right away, we see that name is going to refer to a list with the 0th element as 2 and the first element being a lambda function that refers to its input as your on line 1. And it has the global frame as its parent, so let's make a note of that. Next, we see that there's a function called your and its input is called name. And because it's defined in the global frame, the parent of your is going to be the global frame. So let's make a note of that as well. Because we haven't called your yet, we don't need to worry about this messy code in here. Okay, moving on. Now we're calling your and putting into it true. Right now, I want to emphasize that Python does not evaluate a whole line at once. It evaluates a line from left to right, so as soon as you can replace one section of a line, you need to do it. This is basically a law of the Python language, and if you break it, you're sentenced to deal with some really messy code. With that being said, let's go back to the question. We're referencing your, and in parentheses we have true. Because both of these are valid functions and inputs, we need to evaluate it. So let's do that. The your function is pretty simple. You remember what we do when we call a function, right? We move it into a new frame, f1, because it's the lowest number available. Label it your and label the parent global. The first thing you always do in a new function call is label the input variable. Looking at the code, the input variable is called name, and because we're passing true into the function, it's going to be assigned to name. Now we're ready to go through the function itself. As you can see, not much happens here. All that happens is we bind what to the what function, which calls its input s and the parent is f1. Similarly, we'll bind your to your function, which calls its input s and the parent is f1. You might think that this your overwrites the your here in the global frame, but that's not true. There's a few reasons to this. For one, your has not been made non-local, so anything we do in this frame isn't going to change it. But maybe more intuitively, unless we use non-local somehow, code can only influence whatever frame it's in. Notice that in f1, no variable has been named your yet, so we can call this function your and not change anything. And our return value is going to be the thing what is pointing to, which is the what function. Now we know that your true can be replaced with what, and we see that we're calling what on name. So in f2, we'll write that we're in the what function whose parent is f1, because that's what we said in f1. So now the big question is what s refers to. We know it refers to the same thing name does, but which name? Is it this name in f1? Well, that makes sense, because f1 is the parent function, but that's wrong. Instead, it's this name in the global frame. Just remember that when we pass something into a function, that something doesn't refer to the parent frame, but instead to the frame where the function was called. So let's write that s refers to this list, and let's go through the what function. The first thing it does is declare name to be non-local. Because of what we went through with how s is assigned, you might immediately think that this list is what's made non-local. Instead, to find out what's made non-local, the rule is to go up through the parent frames until we find the first time the variable is referred to, and that's made non-local. The parent of what is f1, and we see that there is something called name in here, which is then made non-local. Python doesn't indicate this in any way, but you can put a star or something next to it and you won't be docked any points. Next, we see that name is changed to a list of name and s. So let's draw a 2-entry list. In the 0th entry, we put name, which is true, and in the first entry, we point what s is pointing to. And now we can point name to the list. We can move on to the last part of what. What is your name? You might be thrown off by this and think that this is testing you on how to return some code that doesn't evaluate to anything, but this is actually a valid Python statement. This is an is statement. And the whole thing is going to be true if the what object is the same as whatever your name returns and false otherwise. So just keep that in mind that in f2, our return value is going to be either true or false. We don't have a what in f2, so we need to go to the parent f1 to find a what. There, what refers to the what function. So your name needs to return this what function for our return value to be true. Does it? Well, let's find out. The first thing to determine is which your function we're going to execute. Be careful not to execute the wrong function because they might be totally innocent. We're executing your in f2 where there is no your, so we need to look in the parent for your. In f1, well, look at that, we have a your, so we're going to execute that. In f3, we note that the function is your and the parent is f1. The input variable is s, and we need to figure out what that is. Well, we pass name into our call to your. We'll look in f2, the frame we called your in, to see if there's a name. There isn't, so we go to the parent f1. Oh, look, there is a name. So s points to this name in f1. Let's look at the code of your a bit closer. Notice anything? There's no return statement, so right away we know that the return value in f3 is going to be none. And if f3 returns none, then your name in f2 is also none. And so the return value for f2 is going to look like what is none, which evaluates to false. We can put false as the return value for f2. Now we can go back to the your function. This next part is pretty convoluted. We know that s is a list, and to keep things simple, let's ignore everything to the right until we need to look at it. S1, well, that just refers to the list in here. So we're looking at another list, name. And what's the first element here? Well, it's a lambda function. This whole sequence, S11, can be replaced with a lambda function. And look at that, parentheses. We're going to have to execute this lambda function, and that means filling out f4. Remember that lambdas don't really have names, so right up here we'll draw the half-life symbol. At the very beginning, we noted that the parent frame is also the global frame, so we'll write that here. And the input variable is called your, so in the first slot we write the word your. What is your going to be? Well, in the function call, your is this thing, name from nothing to 1, a copy of the list name up to but not including the first element. So we look at the frame we called the function in, f3, to see if name is in here. Nope. Alright, so let's look in the parent. Okay, there we are. Name is this list, and the 0th element is true. So in f4, your is going to point to a list that just has true. Now we can execute the function. As you can see, all it does is return the 0th element of a list called name. We again need to decide which name list we're referring to. There is no name in f4, so we'll look in the parent frame, the global frame. And here, well, we have a list called name, and 0th element is 2. So that'll be our return value, and it looks like we're done.